Number 10, Squid Polyp with a remote Caffeinator. We're starting off with a pretty obscure one. Squid Polyps spawn a squid turret every time you open an interactable. They're kind of seen as a meme item, their damage isn't the greatest, and they do have a pretty short shelf life. Now, if you haven't played in a while, it's interesting to note that one of the last updates we got, squid turrets were buffed in a pretty big way. During the early days of the DLC, it was common for void infestors to infect squid polyps, which would basically insta-kill the player from a prolapse. To counter this, Hopoo made a few changes to the squid turrets, including taking their knockback force from 0 to 2000. 2000 knockback force might sound like a lot, but it's really not that crazy. However, stacking squid polyps does not increase the damage stat. It increases the attack speed stat, and with the added knockback, it makes enemies go full Team Rocket. Squids get really crazy when you start stacking them. They actually scale their damage with the enemy's level and not your own. So if you're fighting level 99 enemies, your squid will also be level 99. This makes its damage really consistent. They pack quite a punch when you have a few stacks. Even so, they still have the problem of low survivability, lasting 30 seconds in Monsoon and only 15 in Eclipse. But with a remote Caffeinator, not only does buying drinks spawn squid turrets, but it heals them as well. The squid turrets go crazy with this type of build. This is one of my favorite synergies. It's just two mediocre items coming together to form something greater than the sum of their parts. It's a pretty crackpot synergy, but it works really well. Full disclosure, I was originally going to put bands with Capacitor here, but I feel like we've talked about those items enough, and this one is just so much more interesting. At number 9, Gas plus Ignition Tanks. With Gas, every time you kill an enemy, you create an explosion burning nearby enemies, and Ignition Tank makes those burns 3 times stronger. On its own, this is a great synergy and one I look for in every run, but stacking them can bring the synergy to ridiculous new heights. Stacking Gasoline increases both the radius and duration of the burn. Of the two, this is definitely the better one to stack. If I had a choice between 10 gas and 1 ignition tank, and 1 gas and 10 ignition tanks, I would definitely take the former. But ideally, you'll have the ability to stack both. This is a pretty rare situation, but if you ever find a stage that has both a gasoline and ignition printer, get ready to say goodbye to most of your other white items. The gameplay should speak for itself here. High stacks of these can screen wipe entire stages. The only kind of bad thing about the synergy is that because gas is an on-kill item, it has limited usage on Mithrix. You need a Forgive Me Please, and even then, it doesn't have the same punch it does on regular stages where it chains off every enemy. But regardless, it's a great synergy and one everyone needs to try out at least once. The next item on today's list is Lord Vipin. What can I say about Lord Vipin? Lord Vipin is a wonderful, wonderful man. Lord Vipin protects my grandson and helps me watch region lock content. Oh wait, no, that's actually NordVPN, the sponsor of today's video. Lord Vipin is this guy, apparently. I won't lie, that was actually pretty good, but not as good as NordVPN, the leading VPN service provider that keeps your online experience secure and private. Whether you're browsing the web, streaming your favorite content, or looking at Bungus, NordVPN has got you covered. It's just a great tool to have. It's really important to encrypt your data, especially if you're using public Wi-Fi. Your traffic is always encrypted, and Nord doesn't track or share what you do online. But it's also a great tool for getting around region lock content. Recently, I've been watching Rick and Morty, which isn't available on Netflix in the US, but it is available in Australia. I also remember when I was a wee lad in high school, my school tried to block YouTube at one point, and the kids were able to get around this by using NordVPN. There are so many situations where it's come in handy, and I'm happy they're sponsoring this video because it's a great product. For a limited time, NordVPN is offering 4 months free for my viewers with the purchase of a 2-year subscription. The standard tier is only $3.37 a month, which is about 11 cents a day, and if you don't like it, it has a 30-day money-back guarantee. So go to nordvpn/disputedorigin or click the link in the description to take advantage of this limited time offer. Thank you, Nord, for sponsoring this video. At number 8, Will-O-The-Wisp plus Uke. This is yet another area of effect combo. Will-O-The-Wisp is similar to Gas in that when you kill an enemy, it creates an explosion, dealing damage to nearby enemy. But unlike Gas, the explosion from Will-O-The-Wisp has a 1.0 proc coefficient, meaning it can combo with stuff like ATGs, sticky bombs, or in this case, ukuleles. Ukes have a 25% chance to chain lightning to 3 nearby enemies for 80% of the damage of the thing that procced it. Wisp explosions often hit multiple enemies at once, chaining the explosion damage onto Ukes for a much chunkier area of effect blast. This on its own is nuts, but there's an even stronger variant of this if you switch out Ukulele for Sentient Meathook. Meathook is essentially just a stronger ukulele, dealing more damage and affecting 10 enemies instead of just 3. But Meat Hook also has an effect where it pulls enemies together, so because of this, you can create an explosion with Wisp, and then pull nearby enemies into the explosion with Meat Hook, which in turn kill them, creating more explosions, proccing Meat Hook even more. And if you have both Meat Hook and Uke, it just creates utter carnage. You can also switch out Will-o'-the-Wisp for Voidsent Flame. It's basically the same as Wisp, except the explosion occurs when the enemy is at full health, not when they die. The explosion from Shatterspleen can also act as a replacement for Wisp, since it also has a proc coefficient. This combo is just nuts, and probably my favorite item interaction in the entire game. At number 7, Polyloot and Plasma Shrimp. This is a pretty common synergy. It's one I've mentioned in multiple videos. It's one that really showcases the power that some of these Void items have. Polyloot is obviously the corrupted Yooka-Laylee, and instead of dealing lightning damage to nearby enemies, it hits the same enemy multiple times, taking an area of effect item and turning it into a busted single target item. Plasma Shrimp is the corrupted ATG. It turns 10% of your health into shield, and so long as you have this shield up, Plasma Shrimp will fire missiles on every hit. This includes all items that have a proc coefficient, like Yooka-Laylee, the Perforators, Little Disciple, and so on. The reason Shrimp is broken is because it ignores the proc coefficient for these items. For example, a Polyloot has a proc coefficient of 0.2 and ATG has a hit chance of 10%. Multiply these together and this means you would have a 2% chance to proc an ATG off a Polyloot, but you have a 100% chance to proc a Shrimp. If this is confusing and you're thinking, what the hell is a proc coefficient? What just happened? I have a video where I explain it a little more thoroughly. Shrimp will fire on every hit of a Polyloot, which is some insane damage multiplication. If you happen to find an ICBM, it gets even crazier, firing out 3 Shrimp on every Polyloot proc. Both Polyloot and Plasma Shrimp are amazing items in their own regard, but when comboed together, they become one of the best synergies in the game. Real quick, if you're enjoying the video, please consider subscribing. I'm currently facing charges for unlawfully feeding hard candy to pigeons in the park. I'm in a lot of trouble. Chad Thundercock is the best prosecutor in the state, and he's been after me for years, ever since the famous McDonald's ball pit kerfuffle of '87. So to help me with my legal fees, consider subscribing. Number 6 is Head Stomper plus Quails and a little bit of movement speed. Head Stompers is perhaps the most controversial item in the game. Its effect on paper sounds pretty good. Increased jump height creates a 5 meter to 100 meter radius kinetic explosion on hitting the ground, dealing 1000 to 10,000% base damage. Now, a lot of players don't realize how big of an impact this actually is from max height. One stomp can easily nuke an entire stage. It's possibly the most devastating attack in the entire game. But the problem then becomes, how do you reach max height? Most survivors don't have abilities that can get them high up in the air, and there are very few items that give vertical mobility. Your best shot is Egg, and even with that, you'll need a few fuel cells if you want to get to max height. This is where Wax Quail comes in. Wax Quail has an interesting interaction with the increased jump height from Stompers, where jumping on a slope gives you a large boost straight up. With the more speed you have, the higher up you'll go. This is an extremely elegant way to get to the top of the map, and one that doesn't require an equipment with a cooldown. Since slopes are everywhere, you basically get to use this whenever you want. Wax Quail is essential if you want to get the most out of your Head Stompers, and this combo is the reason Head Stompers is a strong contender for best item in the game. At number 5, we have Shatterspleen with Crit. Shatterspleen has one of the longest descriptions in the game. Gain 5% critical chance. Critical strikes bleed enemies for 240% base damage. Bleeding enemies explode on death for 400 damage, plus an additional 15% of their maximum health. In layman's terms, this item basically has 2 effects. 1, critical strikes will now bleed enemies, and 2, when an enemy that's bleeding dies, it creates a powerful explosion. Now, I don't know if it needs to be stated just how powerful bleed can be. Tri-tips and syringes almost made it on this list. Being able to apply bleed with crits is huge for a lot of survivors. Crit is something you should be investing in anyway, so being able to stack bleed with them makes it a lot more worthwhile. This is what Shatterspleen is famous for, but I'd argue the secondary effect is the even better one. Bleeding enemies explode for 400% damage with a bonus 15% of their max health. That 15% is massive, as it's the only area of effect item in the game that scales with the enemy's health. If you kill an enemy with 1 million health, the explosion will deal 150,000 damage, and with just a few crowbars and watches, these numbers can get even crazier. The explosion just eliminates enemies left and right. When you have a spleen with a decent amount of crit, very rarely will you get overwhelmed. Shatterspleen and crit are a godly combo. Speaking of godly combos, at number 4 we have Watches, Crit, Armor-Piercing Rounds, Crowbar, and sometimes Focus Crystal. While this isn't the flashiest entry on the list, it's arguably the best and most consistent. I've said it before and I'll say it again, all you need to win a run is the right combination of these white items. These damage items all multiply off each other, making for some insane damage outputs, and the cool thing about these items is they're just white. so they don't take up a lot of item real estate, and they increase the effectiveness of about every other combo on this list, with a couple exceptions. That's all I'm going to say about these guys, because I made a full video on this combo a few years ago, so go check that out if you want a more in-depth look at this one. But moving on to number 3, we have Forgive Me Please and Soulbound Catalyst. This is one that has come up a lot recently. This is a really cool one because both of these items have mirrored effects. Forgive Me Please is an equipment that activates your on-kill effects, and Soulbound is an on-kill effect that lowers your equipment cooldown. This effectively creates a feedback loop. When Forgive Me Please first came out, this combo would actually crash your game. They patched it later, making it so you can only have a max of 3 Forgive Me Pleases on a stage at a time, but this does make me wonder if this combo was unintentional. It would seem like these items were meant to be used together, but if that was the case, you would think it wouldn't have crashed your game on release. Just an interesting tidbit that has kind of bothered me for years. Now, this combo on its own doesn't do a whole lot of anything. It requires items to work. Actually, a lot of the stuff we've already mentioned, like gas, ignition tanks, Will-o'-the-Wisps, ceremonial daggers are another really good one. Bottled Chaos can go crazy with this setup. It does require a lot, but for a looped run, this is what you're looking for. Just the ability to spam all of these items makes it by far the best late game damaging equipment. Saw, Capacitor, Prion, nothing even comes close to the power of a good Forgive Me Please build. Now, I haven't really talked a lot about Lunars on this list, but that doesn't mean Lunars have no synergy. There's actually a few good combos that almost made it on this list. Corpse Bloom with Rejuve Rack, Transcendence with Plasma Shrimp, and Shape Glass with Watches, all great combos in their own right. But the next spot blows all of these out of the water. At number 2, Spinal Tonic and Gesture of the Drowned. Lunar items are unique in that they give the player a choice to get a really powerful item, but in exchange, a negative effect will also be given. Perfectly balanced as all things should be. Except that's just incorrect. In the case of Spinal Tonic and Gesture, the negative effects cancel each other out, leaving you only with the positives. Spinal Tonic is famous for the bonkers stat boost it provides, with it increasing damage by 100%, attack speed by 70%, armor by 20%, maximum health by 50%, passive health regeneration by 300%, and movement speed by 30%. By far one of the best equipments in the game. The downside in this case is that every time you use it, it has a 20% chance to give you a debuff that permanently decreases all of your stats. Permanently is in big air quotes, since it goes away temporarily while Tonic is active. This is where Gesture of the Drowned comes in, decreasing your equipment cooldown, with the downside being that it activates automatically, which is actually a win in this case since it means you don't have to click the equipment button every time. With a few gestures, you can have permanent uptime on Tonic, making the rest of the game a walk in the park since you've basically doubled your base stats. Iconic combo and one of the oldest in the game. Topped only by number 1, which is actually one of the newest in the game, only being possible with a DLC item. The number 1 combo in the game is Spare Drone Parts and Empathy Cores, and it's not even close. Spare Drone Parts is a red item that spawns an attack drone, with it also giving other drones a chain gun and a missile launcher. On its own, this is already one of the best items in the game. If you find it, all you need is drones and you'll have a good run. It's seriously that strong. But when you add in Empathy Cores, a boss item that spawns 2 Solus probes that gain attack power with every ally, it's Jover. This thing is insane. To put it in perspective, I was able to beat Eclipse 8 with these 2 items alone and nothing else, and it was a cakewalk. And I don't think the same could be said for any of the other entries on this list. Even Tonic Gesture requires additional items. This combo has been incredibly dominant within the speedrun community, with some people even in favor of banning it due to it making runs more luck and less skill. The real issue with this combo is just its rarity, requiring both a red and a yellow item. The vast majority of runs won't have it, but in the off chance you do happen to get this godly combo, you might as well just quit the title because you already know what the outcome is going to be. But that's it for today's list. Let me know in the comments if there were combos I overlooked. There's so many amazing combos in this game, and I might not even be aware of all of them. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. We're getting awfully close to 100,000. And thank you to everyone that watched this far. And thank you to my members for supporting the channel, as well as NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Ta-ta for now.